Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Amplify Your Business. Today, we are joined by John Davis. He's the CTO and co-founder of Zero Point Cryogenics. I think I got the name right that time, right, John?
You got it.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show, John. I'm
Thank you.
excited to hear all about your business because you're in the business of cold and you're located here in Edmonton as well. We know a thing or two about the cold. It has been sweltering hot, though, the last few days. We're recording this right at the tail end of August. And so we've had a great stretch of really hot weather. And yesterday, I was out on location filming in 32-degree weather outside. I could have used a little bit of cooling off, but I don't think to the degree that your business cools things off to, though.
No, that's right. So at Zero Point Cryogenics, we manufacture a technology called a dilution refrigerator. Dilution refrigerators are the method of continuously cooling below 1 Kelvin. So our fridges get down to about 10 millikelvin, and that's 10 thousandths of a degree above absolute zero. So if absolute zero is minus 273.15 C, we can get down to about minus 273.14 C. So,
damn, that's cold. That's really cold. So why would you ever need a refrigerator to get this cold?
Yeah. So the reason why you want to cool something down is to actually reveal new sets of kinds of physics. So I'm also a physics professor at the University of Alberta. And so I've been doing, this kind of research for 20 years where you remove all the thermal energy from a system, and you can start to reveal kind of what we call the low energy or quantum properties of a system. And so this is of extreme interest these days. If you've probably heard of quantum computing, for example, and if you go and do, say, a Google image search of a quantum computer, what you don't find is a quantum computer. What you're really looking at is pictures of dilution refrigerators. So this is really the hardware platform for quantum technologies and all future quantum technology, including quantum computers.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And so in terms of the market for this, I'd imagine it's going to be a pretty small market, very specialized.
It's specialized customers. I would not say that the market is not particularly small.
Okay.
It's at least 200 million US every year right now. So this is an international sales, but it's very specialized. But what we see is that these kind of refrigerators are moving out of academic labs and into commercial labs. So big companies like Google, Raytheon, IBM, things that Amazon Web Services that you have heard of, right, now have quantum computing arms and that are buying up dilution refrigerators. So what we can really imagine is that when quantum computing becomes truly useful to solve really practical problems, this will explode. And our vision is that data warehouses that you imagine today, like Google server farms, today have racks and racks and racks of classical computers. In the future, they'll have racks and racks and racks of quantum computers based on the hardware platform of dilution refrigerators that we're manufacturing.
Yeah. And so definitely what I'm hearing anyway in the press is that all the quantum computing is going to be the future for sure. That's the direction we're going. It's not an if, it's a when, right? And so in that situation, your demand for your product is going to be huge. So in terms of competitors, though, is there other people who are, in the marketplace right now doing the same thing that you're doing? And how do you compete against them?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. There's a couple of companies, one in the Netherlands and one in the UK, that have been doing this for many, many decades. And now there's one that kind of came up about 10 years ago in Finland that kind of changed and the way we do these things. And so they're a really great company. But we are really looking to make sure that dilution refrigerators are not something that you use in a lab, but something that you can use in a company. They're really trying to make them ultra reliable and ultra easy to use, and really work for that kind of large scale systems that, kind of B2B that we're looking at. And so we're looking at, preparing for that growth and exploding. And we're currently, we're the only company in Canada, and maybe there's another startup in the US that's working on this now.
Very interesting. And so I'm just curious, though, in terms of what you were just saying, it sounds as though your competitors are more lab focused, more research, I presume, then, versus you're really pushing hard into the commercial space then, or making sure that it is commercially viable.
Yeah. So, I mean, our goal right now, our first customers are also academic, lab based, but
Yeah.
our vision is to try to make a system that's so easy to use, so compact and so reliable that this will be the one that companies want to take and fill data warehouses with. So, we're kind of getting in now so that when this breakthrough happens and, fault tolerant quantum computing, that we're right there in the market for when it explodes.
So is that how you're differentiating yourself within the marketplace right now? Is you're saying, we're one step ahead, I guess, on the commercialization curve of everybody else that's doing it.
Yeah, we have the most compact system on the market. I would say we have the most easy to use system on the market, and we're working on making our system the most reliable system on the market as well. So really making it so that if I'm Google and I have a million of these things in a warehouse, that I don't have to worry about them. They're just running and it's just easy to maintain. So that's really what we're trying to use to differentiate ourselves from existing customers, mostly in Europe.
So what inspired you as a researcher, professor there at the University of Alberta to then start to dip your toe in the waters of entrepreneurship then?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold. One, I've been doing low temperature physics for more than 20 years and running these kinds of dilution refrigerators for more than 20 years. And one of the aspects that was looking at the products and saying what's out there and what I have in my lab. For example, I have 3 of our competitors' products in my lab, and just looking at them and going, what do I not like about this system? Why is this system like this? Why is this system like this? So I was really driven to just make a better product. And so this is one of our differentiators as, I commercialized the technology, but also, I was a customer, right?
Yeah,
So this is,
yeah.
I kind of know the product well and know what I don't like about what's out there on the market. So that this is a big thing for me. But also, I have kind of committed a significant amount of my brain power to helping other people commercialize products at the university. So
Oh, really?
I have, I graduate a lot of students, and I realized that eventually that most of them aren't going off into academia, which is what we're training them for. We're really training these graduate physicists to be academics, but a lot of them are going off into industry, and especially into these sort of quantum computing industries. And so the question really was like, what can we do to, better prepare them for industry? And so I started teaching a class that I call Physics, Innovation and Entrepreneurship, PI. And the idea really is to just learn about business and commercialization and entrepreneurship from the lens of a physicist. So we speak in physics jargon and we learn about business, but through physics jargon instead of business jargon, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so we really, I spent a lot of time thinking about entrepreneurship and teaching about entrepreneurship. And, it's sort of one of those things you think about it enough and you realize, okay, let's do this, right? Let's do this ourselves. Let's be serious and try to really make a business out of this.
Very interesting. And so I'm really curious about, as you were going through the last few years, really developing the business and going hard into entrepreneurship, then there's some things that I'm sure that you discovered along the way where it's like, man, I really wish I would have known that. So if you could write yourself a letter and send it back to your earlier self when you were just starting going down this road, which I think you said was around 2017 when you founded the company. So 4 or 5 years ago, what would be in that letter?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure I'm going to nail the answer on this one. So,
Okay.
So I had kind of been watching the entrepreneurship space for quite some time, and I did have one previous startup that I was a part of. And so actually we had a little bit of some of this foresight on certain things. So I founded the company in 2017, and we developed our prototype at the university from 2018 to 2021. It was really only last year that we moved it out of the university and into really the company full time. But actually, that's one founding your company early is a benefit. So if you're out there and you're thinking about maybe starting a company, go ahead and found it now, pick a name, start it up. And even if it's a little bit dormant for a while, that's okay. So we found that one of the big things, you know, we have a lot of provincial and federal support from grants for our startup. You often can't get those unless you've been founded for at least 2 years. So this is the checkbox that you have to check. And so, you know, if you're thinking about doing some entrepreneurship, go ahead and incorporate, right? That's one of these things that we luckily did early, and I'm glad we did. Just, you know, a couple of my other ideas are, you know, make sure that you understand the market and you understand your product, right? Because that's really, I think, a big one that's really going to be tested time and time again, right?
Yeah. Well, and you definitely understood what the issues were, right, in terms of what needed to be created. And as a customer on the academic side, I would imagine you're bringing that. But in terms of really understanding the market, in terms of the commercial customer, where were you pulling in, I guess, the expertise there? How did you get to better understand what the Googles and AWSs of the world are going to be needing and wanting?
No, that's a great question. And you know, part of this is speculation, right? Like you try to have vision for what's to come, and you know, solve problems before they hit, right? So this is what we really try to do. You know, we try to make an amazing product, but also sort of see the future a little bit. This is part of our goal. So we've had some good traction actually interacting with one of a Canadian quantum computing startups. And when our product hit, you know, their needs, then actually everything changed, right? So our MVP doesn't look anything like our first product, right? And that's partly just because, you know, you have to, when you get out there and see what the market really wants, you have to respond to that, right?
Yeah. And so you're getting your foot in through more startup then companies out there in the quantum mechanics or quantum computing side of things.
I think they're kind of all we would call them all startups.
You would, yeah, okay.
I mean, even Google, I would call, you know, in that way, I would essentially call it a quantum. They have a quantum startup, but yeah, okay, I understand your point. Yeah. So no, there's some really great Canadian companies. Actually, Canada's doing really well in the commercializing quantum technology.
Okay.
And so we've had some luck spending some time with some really great Canadian quantum computing companies. I can't really tell you who they are at the moment.
Yeah, no worries. And so when it comes to, you know, producing something in Canada or North America versus you said your competitors right now are all European, you know, there's been so many challenges with regard to supply chain management for critical elements that go into the manufacturing of a lot of different things that we would be using here in Canada. And you know, we're not unique. Everybody in the world globally are having the same kind of challenges. But I mean, it was really exposed to us here through COVID when we didn't have the capacity to even create a vaccine anymore that we needed, that we thought was critical. And so this is something, as you see a shift into quantum computing, those are going to be pretty sensitive pieces of equipment, I would imagine, that need to be up and running, and you're supplying a really core element to it. How important do you think that's going to be? And is that going to give you a big advantage in Canada and maybe in North America in terms of you know, market penetration?
Yeah, I think that you've really hit on two key things there. One is the supply chain issue, and you know, so when founding and when starting up Zero Point Cryogenics, we had to make some critical decisions on how we did things based on that supply chain. So you know, we obviously we order a lot of OEM components, a lot of technology that goes into our system, and we suffer every day from supply chain and delays. Well, you know, we're trying to deliver to customers, but you know, we're trying to get stuff in the door too, right? It's really a tricky balance. But one of the decisions we made early on, and which seemed a little bit risky, but has really paid off, is we're doing all of our own manufacturing in-house. So we have a lot of major components that really have to be machined. And so we actually have built our own machine shop in our facility. So half of our facility is a machine shop where we design, we design in one space and then manufacture and can iterate really quickly. So this has been a major thing, but we're not really waiting for stuff to be supplied to us then. So, a lot of our competitors are actually having parts machined, for example, in China and receiving them. And I'm sure this is causing them delays right now. There's also other issues there regarding IP, for example, and protecting your IP. And this kind of brings up the second issue you mentioned, which is, in my opinion, a national security issue. As we move forward with quantum technologies, one of the things that quantum technologies is proclaimed to be able to do, quantum computing is proclaimed to be able to do, is solve your encryption issues. So it's going to really change the way we communicate. For example, the problem, the way that you and I communicate over a secure channel, or communicate to your bank, for example, over a secure channel, that is really vulnerable to hacking via quantum computers. So you can break this encryption code with a quantum computer. And so we can see already that a variety of issues are really going to be, you're going to have homegrown solutions. You're going to have homegrown quantum computing, but you're also going to have homegrown platforms for this quantum technology. So a few years ago, the US actually outlawed the export of these dilution refrigerators from the US to China already. So we can already see sort of a trade war that's going to be coming, where it's going to be very important that countries and regions manufacture their own quantum technologies.
And so was that banning, because I mean, there isn't anything in terms of like, privacy related that's inherent within your product. It's just, did the US not want it exported because they didn't want them to start to advance their quantum computing as fast? Yeah,
they wanted to try to disable their quantum computing if possible. And that's my understanding. That's my speculation.
Interesting. Yeah. So you guys become a tool in the political warfare that's out there from time to time.
That's right. It's a platform in a quantum race, right?
Yeah.
Quantum Cold War. So
yeah, cold indeed. Okay. So
that was no shortage of cold jokes, but that was a good one. So
okay. One thing that I'm really curious about too is you said that you before we hit the record button that you just completed your first sales then. So I think your first 3 sales just went through over the summer months here.
Yeah.
And so obviously now you're at this point of commercialization, and those first sales are so critical. So how does this now change in terms of the direction that your company maybe is going in? Does those first initial sales, did that inform you where you really needed to focus your marketing, your product development, how you're going to position yourself, or was that all kind of in the plan already to begin with?
I mean, so we've been developing these 3 customers for 6 or 8 months. So that this really has been a part of the plan, but it does definitely focus all of your, now we have delivery dates, right, for products. And so this really does focus your product development, as you've said. You really have to make sure that, we probably have 250 OEM components that we have to secure for one of these systems, right? So we're really making sure that we have the vendor networks set up, and we have sourced them. We have good relationships. We have commercial terms with our vendors, that our manufacturing is running, that we have the employees to actually assemble these systems. It's really, it is a crazy time to be in our company. It's really exciting. It's really great. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy from the team. But yeah, it really does focus you. And this is kind of what we've been hoping for, is that, that first sale really changes a business. When you go from pre-revenue to revenue, or, pre-PO to post-PO, like, it really changes things. So we have basically bootstrapped our company. So we have a little bit of angel investment, actually, from the local Startup TNT network. So that those guys are Startup TNT are really great. So shout out to them. If you're an entrepreneur and you're in Edmonton and you haven't gone to a Startup TNT event, make sure you go. They're on Thursday nights. I'll see you there.
Yeah, say hi to Zach, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I actually, so Startup TNT has been critical in our venture. So I met my CEO through Startup TNT. We met one of our first employees, and we just brought on our director of sales and marketing, all through Startup TNT connection. So really have been nurtured by that community. So
yeah. So what are some of the critical next pieces that you're going to have to put into place in terms of either the manufacturing capacity, the product research capacity, or on the sales and marketing capacity for you to take that next step in your growth?
yeah, I mean, so we always, one of the key problems for a startup is always money, right? Cash flow.
Yeah.
So even though we have sales, these things are expensive to build. They're expensive for the customer to buy, but also, they take some time to build. And so having all that product on hand, assembling it, and then, maybe 6 months later, getting the revenue from it is really a big thing. And so cash flow is major for us. Luckily, now that we have POs, we can actually go out to the banks, and we're talking to a lot of great banks like RBC and BDC. And so we're now that you have a PO in hand, you can get some traction with the banks, which is great. We are scaling in terms of people, and that's some of our next big challenges, I would say. So we need more technical people to assemble these systems. And as we're going to just be continuously hiring as we bring more sales in. Yeah. And finally is just, we've been working on these 3 sales for a while. It's bringing in that next, 10 or 15 or 20 sales, right? To just keep that growth up. So,
Yeah.
and
Now,
then after that, it's going to be space. How do we, we're going to have to expand our facility really quickly. So.
Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of talk around a lot of different industries in terms of recruitment. A lot of people are very challenged in recruiting for their specialized jobs, and other industries that haven't had any challenges with that. Do you see that being a bit of a challenge here in Edmonton, because you're developing, you're manufacturing something that, there isn't anybody else who has experience probably anywhere close to Edmonton in developing what you guys are manufacturing there. So is that quite a restrictive situation for you guys as well?
Actually,
Liverpool?
I think Edmonton's a great place to build this kind of hardware company. So for 2 reasons. One is we've had no problems recruiting so far, right? So in fact, I would say we've recruited, not hired. We've gone out and identified specific people and been able to tag them and bring them on the team. So this is something, we have an amazing team, and that's been a really big part of our success. So we have had a great relationship, again, I said, with Startup TNT, but also with the university. So the U of A, we've had some great hires from the university, but also great hires from the local tech industry. So we've stolen a few people from local tech companies. So thank you. But also, when we start to grow, we really are going to be hiring, for example, graduates from NATE, for example. So industrial technicians and assembly technicians, machinists. And so actually Edmonton's a great place. Actually, when these people are being trained kind of for oil and gas, but actually our system isn't too dissimilar from oil and gas in some ways. Our system is really a highly engineered industrial industrial technology that really, to an oil and gas trained technologist, actually looks pretty similar. I mean, the
pressure,
physics of it isn't known.
High pressure fluids or gases,
Exactly.
right? It's
fluid flow, high pressure, right? Some, complicated valves and PLC controls. And actually, so Edmonton's a great place to build hardware in this way. And we have great industrial space. We have great industrial space that's close to the university, close to NATE, close to U of A. So it's actually really ideal in a lot of these ways that you can get an industrial space close to the tech and education space.
Yeah. It's great to hear that there's some advantages to the Edmonton location, right? It's nice to hear, because we always are big boosters of the cities in which we're in, and it's exciting to see some of the manufacturing innovation that's happening here, yours included, obviously. One final question. I'm just really curious because you're in the early days. You just finished getting your first 3 POs, and I'm just curious, if somebody were to have given you $1 million or $10 million a couple of years ago, when everything was still in that development stage, pre-commercialization, what would you have done differently? How would you have invested that money in your business so that you could, accelerate and grow?
I think I would have done 2 things. I would have brought on some of our people earlier than we did, right? Obviously, do everything earlier, but also I would have bought more inventory. So if you could foresee the challenges with supply chain and have components and inventory on the shelf, I know that this is sort of the antithesis of this just-in-time, manufacturing, but I think we can see the problems with this just-in-time manufacturing now. So if you'd given me $1 million, or if you give me $1 million today, I'm going to spend it on inventory, because we know we can get the customers. We know we can deliver the system. We got to have the inventory and on our shelf to make sure that we can deliver it quickly.
Yeah, really cool. Well, that's a great answer. And well, they were all great answers. I really appreciate the time that you spent with us today, John, just exploring a little bit around an industry that I have no idea was even happening here or was something that was needed. So it's really neat. In terms of reaching out to you, connecting with you, if anybody wanted to follow up, how would you suggest that they do so?
Yeah, you can check our website, zpcryo.com. You can email our general at info@zpcryo.com, or you can email me directly, john@zpcryo.com. You can probably also Google us, Zero Point Cryogenics. Do that. Google us. Help our SEO, right? So just Google our name a whole bunch of times. And find us on Twitter. Find us on LinkedIn. You can follow us. We have sort of an educational social media campaign where you can learn more about low temperature physics, and we just sort of generally post about interesting parts of the cryogenics business. So feel free to follow us, and you'll hopefully learn a little bit of physics as well as learn a little bit more about our manufacturing here in Edmonton.
Excellent. One actual final question. We have the long weekend that's just coming up right around the corner. Everybody enjoys a nice cold beverage on a hot, sunny day, over the long weekend. You must be the guy who has the best setup at home for keeping your drinks cool, right? No?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've always said so. Our system, actually, you could probably put a 6-pack of beer in it and cool it down to ultra low temperatures. We should really partner with some great local brewery like Sea Change or Bent Stick, and put some beers in our fridge. So absolute zero beers, which I can just see it now, right? So
completely. I love it. Awesome. Well, we'll have to work on that collaboration. We know definitely we've had a few of the brewers on our show in the past. So yeah, there's I think a collaboration in the works. I'll do the taste testing. That's what I can contribute to it.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, John. Really appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching or listening to this episode, if you want to check out the archives, head over to amplifyyourbusiness.ca. So we're going to find them all. And then obviously, if you're listening to this on the podcasting platforms of your choice, just like and subscribe over there, and you'll be able to get all of our future episodes as well. So thanks again. Really appreciate it, John. And for everybody else out there, have a prosperous day.